Notre Dame has had a lot of star athletes come through South Bend in the past 25 years, but which player would have made the most money if he or she could profit off their name, image, and likeness while they were in college? Luke Smith and I discuss on this edition of Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Welcome to Locked On Irish. It is Wednesday, April 19th, and thank you for making this your first listen of the day. As always, you can watch the show on YouTube or listen wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're new to the program and want to stay up to date on future episodes, you can subscribe to the show from wherever it is that you're tuning in from. And if you really like what you're hearing, you can like the video below if you're watching on YouTube or rate the show 5 stars if you're listening to the podcast. My name is Tyler Wojciak, and I am the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer for college football talent at Fox Sports. And in today's episode, I'm going to be joined by my good friend Luke Smith to make good on my promise from last week when I said that we would debate which Notre Dame athletes would have made the most NIL money in their careers had it been around during their time. We were actually supposed to do this on last Thursday's show, but then we had to pivot because Notre Dame surprised everybody and opened up their entire practice to the media, so we had to talk about that instead. Plus, today on the show, we're going to talk a little bit about our old pal Mike Brey, who is headed to Atlanta to join Quinn Snyder's coaching staff on the Atlanta Hawks. A quick programming note before Luke comes on. I'm actually going to be at the University of Oklahoma these next couple of days for something I'm working on with Fox. I'm going to do my best to find some time to record an episode for Thursday, but admittedly, it's going to be tough with my work and travel schedule. So if I'm not able to put something out on Thursday, I will definitely be back on Friday to preview some of the biggest things I'll be looking out for in the spring game on Saturday. So check out our socials to stay up to date with all of that. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Irish and on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. And I'll make sure I keep you updated over these next couple of days. Okay, let's welcome on Luke Smith. All right, Luke Smith is back to talk NIL and our old friend Mike Brey. We're obviously going to talk about which Notre Dame athletes would have made the most NIL money in college. But first, we got some news on Monday that Bray is headed to the ATL. What are your thoughts on Bray dipping his toes into the NBA game?
Probably suits him a little bit better. I'm interested to see how he does as an assistant coach. Honestly, it probably works for him. The Hawks are an interesting landing spot just because I think there's a lot of uncertainty there with what's going to happen with Trae Young and kind of a team that has underachieved for all the talent that they have. But obviously he has some ties to Quinn Snyder dating back to their days at Duke. So I think that that's kind of where that comes from. It's definitely an interesting one though, because I thought it was weird that Quinn Snyder just sort of took this job midseason. And I guess maybe shouldn't be that shocking given that Bray did tweet a picture of himself at a Hawks practice like a month ago, but it's still, I'm just a little bit surprised he wants to continue coaching.
Yeah, it seems like he's kind of having this back and forth in his head because there was one point where we all thought he was headed to USF. There was that report out there that he was going to become their head coach. And then he said, no, never mind, I'm going to do television. And now he said, screw that, I'm going into coaching. And he's going into the NBA where not only does he not have any coaching experience in the NBA ever, I don't know if you heard this. He was on Dan Dock's podcast recently, and he said that this past weekend, when he got to watch all 8 first-round games, is the first time he's ever been able to do that since he started coaching in college basketball, because normally at this time he has other things to do. So I think it's fair.
Definitely not recruiting.
And certainly not playing. The season is well past. So maybe this was his vacation time and he couldn't even be bothered to watch the NBA, but I thought it was pretty hilarious that he's like, yeah, I never even watched the games. And now he's going to coach them.
It is interesting. I don't know if this got enough spotlight, but he won this award from the U.S. Basketball Writers Association a couple weeks ago, literally called like the good guy of the year, which I think was a joke on an old show that you used to produce in terms of like the whole joke was that guys that were on their way out, but they're going about it the right way are good guys. And I kind of thought that was funny that that's an actual award. He won that. And I guess he's parlaying that into an assistant coaching job with the Hawks.
It's random, but good for Bray, I guess. It'll be interesting to see how he does in the NBA. And hey, we're rooting for him over here. We're big Mike Brey fans. All right, let's shift gears here to our draft, and here's how it's going to work. We're going to take turns selecting some different Notre Dame athletes to try to figure out which ones would have made the most NIL money in their careers, had always been around, and then we can compare at the end and try to figure out which side would have made the most money. Since I just turned 27 and Luke is 26, we're really just going to focus on the past 25 years for the sake of this exercise. So if you tweet at me afterwards and say I'm an idiot because I didn't include someone like Paul Hornung, you're probably right, but just don't do it. Okay? All right, Luke, you lead us off here with the first overall pick.
Considering the time we're looking at here, I think the obvious number one overall pick has got to be Brady Quinn, who is now running Notre Dame's Notre Dame Collective. And I think that there's some pretty obvious candidates here for where he would have gone. If you're considering the time when he was really peaking, 2005, 2006, that's right around that same time that, looking back, I don't know how these clothing brands were ever popular, but you're talking about like Hollister, Abercrombie, and American Eagle. I think he could have made a killing just being a representative for those companies. And I think that you would have seen him really, really benefit from that. And I think he might know that, which might help to explain why he's so involved in Notre Dame's efforts today.
I could totally see him doing these shirtless cover shoots for Abercrombie and Hollister and all those. Well, I think Abercrombie's kind of having a comeback these days. I see a lot of people there.
Didn't they go, or maybe it was Aeropostale that went bankrupt a couple of years ago, actually.
I think that was Aeropostale.
Yeah.
They're all the same.
Yeah.
Hollister would always scare me because you'd go in the mall and it looked like a haunted house and you could smell it from like a mile away. Right. I could definitely see Brady Quinn being a great representative for any of those companies. And it's kind of easy to forget just how big of a star Brady was. I mean, even though the teams didn't have a ton of postseason success, to say the least, he was he was by far my favorite player when I was a kid. He was like a superhero to a lot of us. And it shows you kind of the power that the Notre Dame quarterback position, like when it's at its peak and they have a really talented player at the position and a recognizable face, like they really are elevated among pretty much every other player in college football.
Without a doubt. And I think that we're already seeing that to be the case already, actually, with Sam Hartman. I know Tim O'Malley reported in his Monday musings that from sources he's heard that Sam Hartman is Notre Dame's highest earning NIL performer this season already, followed by Joe Alt and Ben Morrison. I've heard that from a couple people as well. So that's not surprising. And I think that he's already seeing, his value be realized quite quickly without actually taking a snap yet for the Irish.
I know. Just imagine if he has really good this season, which we all think and hope he will. All right, for my first pick, I'm going with Skylar Diggins because
that's a good call.
It's been some time. It's been basically a decade since she played for Notre Dame, but it's kind of easy to forget how big of a star she was too. Like I was going back through it, and first of all, Lil Wayne showed up to South Bend, sat courtside for a Notre Dame women's basketball game.
Which
just
is outrageous.
Yeah. I actually have a question there that I want to get to in a second, but there's actually more to it. Drake, during the 2014 ESPYs, he was hosting the event, was wearing her Notre Dame jersey, and they did a whole skit about how she was friend-zoning him. Drake, who at the time was still one of the biggest artists in the entire world. She comes on the stage, and they do this whole thing about how, he wants a kiss from her, and then she gives him a forehead kiss. It was a 4-minute ordeal, and she was just a massive, massive star, and I think she could have profited a ton off that had NIL been around when she was at Notre Dame. If you look at it now, if you look at the top 10 athletes in college who earn the most NIL money, I think 4 or 5 of them are women, and I think number 2 is Livy Dunn, the gymnast at LSU. I think Skylar Diggins was a bigger star back then than Livy Dunn is now, so I think she would have made an absolute killing at Notre Dame.
That's a great call. And yeah, it kind of got me to thinking, honestly, it could have been just from appearing in music videos for those rappers, alone. I don't know what the appearance fee for that is, but I think that definitely could have happened.
I was trying to think of one specific brand, and I couldn't think of one because I think she would have just been, every single brand would have loved to have Skylar Diggins as the face of their company, and she probably would have had to turn a lot of people down as opposed to picking some up here and there. But wait, I have one quick question for you though. on the topic of Lil Wayne and Drake, Lil Wayne was actually in South Bend. Can you give me the most random celebrity appearances in South Bend over the past few decades? Because the first one that came to mind for me was Snoop Dogg at Club Fever, but I know there's a few more.
Yeah, that one is definitely up there. Let me think. Who is in this list?
Wasn't there a random person who performed at Legends one time?
Well, I was gonna say the Chainsmokers because they were
That's a
at
good one.
and I remember they like were just throwing beers into the crowd at New Finney's and like gave a girl a black eye by just drilling her with the beer. Um, there are definitely some other. I mean, Taylor Swift has got to be up there, right? I know her brother went to school there, but her and Selena Gomez
Yeah.
being together, that's
Oh,
just
that's
still
right.
that's an all-time
Selena
weird
was
one.
there.
And then shoot, I'm trying to think who else.
Alex Rodriguez was at a game, I think.
Jason Kidd at last year at the Cal game. That was, I guess he did go to Cal, but that was still odd. There was a picture of him and Pat Connaughton together.
Joey Chestnut.
Yeah. And
didn't we lose the Cincinnati game because of him, or was that a different game?
yes, that was Cincinnati. And then I'm also going to go with Brett Kavanaugh because he was at the Stanford game this year. So that's on him too.
All right, wow. There's a lot more celebrities showing up to Notre Dame games than I thought. Grand slams, no-hitters, and double plays are back, and there's no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, new customers can step up to the plate with a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up, place your first bet, and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win. Don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, who's your number 2?
So this one, I think probably, given if you look at what happened in real time, may have actually been the number one earner. It's got to be Manti Te'o just because of everything that happened. But I was also doing some thinking. I think that if NIL existed when Manti Te'o had everything happen to him, perhaps the truth of what happened might have been uncovered a little bit quicker, because you would think that some companies would do a little bit more due diligence before shelling out a bunch of money to somebody to be the face of their company. And I wonder if like that story doesn't become nearly as big as it did if NIL exists.
Wow, that is really interesting. I never thought about it like that. Because you're saying that these companies probably would have wanted more. They would have, I mean, it kind of sounds like twisted to say, but let's be honest, these companies probably would have tried to capitalize on the sad story. If they looked into it a little bit further, they might have realized, this might not all check out. So then they might back out and then word could leak. That actually could have happened. Wow, I never really thought about it like that.
Yeah, because I think like if you take out all of that on its face, just because of how ridiculous his season was and the stories that surrounded him, of course, everybody would have wanted him to represent their brands. But I do think that would have led to the truth being uncovered a little bit quicker.
And even if it didn't come out, right away, imagine if all these companies started giving him money, he's doing endorsements and all this stuff. It would have been a little bit harder for him to do during the season in 2012 because he obviously is occupied with football. So maybe it would have been a situation where like he made some money and then it comes out, and that could have completely ruined that 2012 season. But he also, in the 3 years prior to that, he would have made a bunch of money before that because he came in as such a big high school star. And even though Notre Dame wasn't that great for his first 3 years, I think just the fact that he committed to Notre Dame, given his stature as a recruit, that he would have been able to make a lot of money in the interim. But I agree, if he had already been making money and then all that stuff came out in 2012, we could have been looking at that situation very differently.
Absolutely.
All right, so I was thinking Manti as well. So I'm going to skip ahead. I think it's got to be Golden Tate. The name is just so easy. Plus, he was a super exciting player. And I don't think I'm breaking any news here. Golden Tate certainly likes himself and liked himself a lot then. So I think he would have been down to do every single opportunity that was thrown his way, different ways to make money throughout his time at Notre Dame. And plus, even though Notre Dame wasn't that good at the time, he still did win the Biletnikoff. He was a big name in college football, and all his antics like jumping into the band against Michigan State, that alone could have been a T-shirt worth.
There were shirts that said Air Golden. And I mean, he couldn't profit off that, but he could have. Like, I mean, maybe without not.
Yeah,
There might have been some copyright issues there, but I know those were shirts.
I literally had a shirt that said Brady Quinn for Heisman, and he didn't
Yeah.
see a cent of
I had a Jimmy Clausen one that said that too, which is funny in retrospect.
I was trying to think of specific brands, though, for Golden Tate. I couldn't think of one. I just think it would have been a bunch of different things all based on his name, which also would have kind of complicated things with the school because we know Notre Dame does not like when students sort of use the university as a way to amplify their brands. And also that might have created a complicated relationship between Golden and the school, but I still think Golden would have made so much money in just 3 years at Notre Dame.
Yeah, that's a really good call. And honestly, one that almost slipped my mind. I don't know how, but there's no doubt that he would have been in that ballpark as well.
Who you got next?
I'm going to say Pat Connaughton here just because of the dominance across two sports. I think it was Mike Brey who had this quote his junior year. He dunked on Jabari Parker and struck out Jameis Winston. That's a pretty damn good year. And then when you consider how good Notre Dame was in hoops his senior year, I just think he would have been so marketable. I think he was really relatable to a lot of people too, just because he was this Irish Catholic kid from Boston. I don't know what specific brands would have been after him, but I think it would have been a lot. I think he is very marketable.
I agree. He would have made a bunch of money, and he already did make a lot of money when he was in college because he had that deal with the Orioles where he was actually able to pitch in their minor leagues in that summer before his senior season at Notre Dame. So he was one of the few kids who got to make a bunch of money playing sports while they were in college, and then he got to come back and just be a regular student. Well, not really a regular student, but you get my point. Like, he got that signing bonus from the Orioles and then got to enjoy that all summer and then comes back to college his senior year with plenty of money in his bank account. So I think he definitely would have been up there. I was thinking about him. I did not include him in mind because his first 3 years, even though he was a two-sport athlete, the basketball team hadn't reached that point yet. But then once they did, it was game over. He would have made a bunch of money. So for me, I'm going to go with Tom Zbikowski, another two-sport athlete, although his other sport wasn't at Notre Dame. He was a professional boxer. Speaking of shirts, I had a shirt that said, it's like Tough Tommy's Boxing Academy with 2 boxing gloves and the number 9. That was a pretty popular shirt. And even though he's a man of few words, I think he was extremely marketable and fans just loved him. Kids loved him. And he was just another really exciting player. Like, he was a safety. He absolutely destroyed dudes like as a tackler, and then he could return punts. And the ball just seemed to find him, especially in that 2005 season. He finished his career with 5 touchdowns as a safety. So I think he would have made a bunch of money as well.
That's a good call because I was actually going to put him and Jeff Samardzija as kind of a combo package. They were roommates in college, and I think they both were kind of a little bit different from Brady Quinn in that they personified a little of that just like more blue-collar Catholic Midwestern edge to them. Like, I honestly wouldn't have been surprised if they were sponsored by like Tap Out or something in 2005. Just like something kind of, or like Jeff Samardzija could have done something with like Shark Week on Discovery Channel. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of opportunities there.
Was that company called Gymshark? They make like athleisure. I don't know if that was around then.
I don't know if it was either. But
that would have been perfect for Samardzija. Zbikowski's brands would have been absurd. Tap Out was a good one. Maybe Mountain Dew. I feel like people who drink Mountain Dew would have loved Zbikowski. Golden Gloves. Well, he was a Golden Gloves boxer, wasn't he?
I think so.
He actually probably could have been able to profit off the boxing ones or the ones that are like boxing adjacent. But that's a really good one. I think those guys, that whole 2005 team, we've talked about this before, even though they actually, when you look back on it, they didn't do a ton on the field. Like, their biggest win was a loss against USC, a close loss. But still, to this day, those guys, like, their names are going to be remembered forever because of what they did in a 2-year span. And the best season out of those two was a 10-win season, which now is like, that's the expectation.
Yeah, it is wild looking back on. But just because the program had been in such a malaise for over a decade, I guess, really, that it just really rejuvenated the fan base.
All right, so my last one here, I was going back and forth between two people. And I was going back and forth between Jimmy Clausen and Arike Ogunbowale because Arike obviously had that insane run during the 2018 women's NCAA tournament. She hits 2 game winners in the Final Four, and then obviously the one to win the national championship. The fact that she did that, became this huge star, and then got to come back for one more season, I think she would have made so much money her senior year. But I'm actually going to take Jimmy Clausen because of the Notre Dame quarterback thing. And coming out of high school, his celebrity status was so insane. I mean, his commitment when he showed up in a limousine to the College Football Hall of Fame when it was still in South Bend with maybe the most absurd haircut of all time. Like, just after that day alone, he would have been able to make a killing. I'm putting him kind of later, though, because his teams were they didn't amount to anything when he was at Notre Dame, but he was such a good player, and he was such a big star coming into Notre Dame, I think he would have made a killing.
Yeah, he probably, he could have done something with some high-end fashion designer, and then he probably would have had animal rights activists after him after showing up in that fur coat to the College Football Hall of Fame. But I agree. He would have been able to take advantage of his market value right away just because of how much hype there was when he arrived on campus.
I know. And even though some people, I really don't like when fans say that his career was a disappointment, because even though the teams were, it was not his fault. Especially in 2009, he was a really, really good player at Notre Dame. And it's unfortunate he didn't get to stick around for his senior season, because I think Notre Dame might have actually been a lot better had he been around in 2010. But he left with Charlie Weiss, and that was that. All right, who's your last pick here before we go?
So this is a tough one, because I feel like that probably hits on most of them, but I'm going to go ahead here and say I think I'm between two people here. And those two people are Everett Golson and Will Fuller. Everett Golson, because if he doesn't get kicked out of school and there's NIL and he's coming off going to the national championship game as a redshirt freshman quarterback, then I don't think there's any denying it's probably Everett Golson. But because that did happen, and because of just quite frankly, he had a really wacky career where he only ended up playing for 2 years in a Notre Dame uniform, I think I'm going to have to give the nod to Fuller just because of how electrifying he was and the fact that Notre Dame's had very few wide receivers like him really ever. So I think I'm going to have to give the nod to Will Fuller here just because of how electrifying he was.
Definitely one of the most fun players to watch during our lives. And he also came at a good time, too, because that 2015 team was really, really talented, and they suffered some really unfortunate losses that season against teams that I think they were better than, like that Clemson game. That one. You were there in that hurricane, right? Mm-hmm. So
yeah, that was fun.
One of these days we got to do most crippling losses.
God, that might be a tricky exercise.
That might be a sad day in the summer where we just feel like being extra sad for a day. But I like that pick. I think Fuller, the thing about him is he was such a good player, and I think he was extremely marketable because of his play. But he was like the most quiet, laid-back dude ever. Whenever he talked to the media, it wasn't like an asshole or anything. He was just a man of few words and really low-key. So I don't know how that would have affected his marketability. But he was just so good. I think he still would have made a lot of money.
And honestly, kind of as you say that, and considering what we've heard about how Joe Alt has done in NIL, the better answer here might be Mike McGlinchey and Quentin Nelson, just because of especially McGlinchey coming back for a 5th year. And he does have a personality. Quentin Nelson is one of the weirdest guys ever. But he's
Taylor Swift's boyfriend, you mean?
Yeah. He's like a very eccentric, intense guy. I think that those guys would have done very well for themselves.
Basically, there's a rumor out there that Taylor Swift and Quentin Nelson were romantically linked. And if you can think of a more absurd couple than those two, let me know, because I can't think of one. Apparently, those rumors have been debunked. But you're right. Like the Bash Bro persona between Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey, I think they probably would have been so overboard with that. But that's how crazy Notre Dame is, where like 2 offensive linemen could end up being some of the most marketable players in the past 2+ decades. So in recap, I had Skylar Diggins, Golden Tate, Tom Zbikowski, and Jimmy Clausen, who was 0-4 again.
So we had Brady Quinn, Manti Te'o, Pat Connaughton, and Jeff Samardzija.
I like that 4. All right. Well, let us know who you think won this draft. And Luke, let's do it again soon, man. Thank you.
All right.
That's going to do it for me today. Thanks again to Luke, and thank you for making this your first listen of the day. As a reminder, I'm going to be on the road for work these next couple of days, but I'm going to do my best to get an episode out on Thursday. But if not, I'll have an episode out on Friday regardless, so be on the lookout for that in the coming days. I'll keep you updated on our social media accounts, which you can find on Twitter at Locked On Irish, on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod, and my personal Twitter account at Tyler Wojciak. That's at Tyler, Wojciak. I'll see you guys soon.